The evening sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of the Golden Fork, one of Atlanta's most prestigious restaurants. Sarah Miller adjusted her crisp black apron and checked her reflection in the polished silverware. At 26 years old, she had been working at the restaurant for 3 years, and she considered herself one of the best servers on staff. It was 6:30 p.m. on a Friday, and the restaurant was starting to fill up with its usual crowd of well-dressed businesspeople and wealthy locals. The smell of freshly baked bread and sizzling steaks filled the air as Sarah moved between tables with practiced ease, flashing her rehearsed smile at every customer. Table 7 needs more wine, she reminded herself, walking briskly past the bar where crystal glasses caught the light from the chandeliers above. The restaurant's interior was a perfect blend of modern elegance and southern charm, with dark wooden panels and soft jazz music playing in the background. Sarah took pride in her ability to read customers quickly. She could tell at a glance who would order expensive wines, who might need extra attention, and who would leave generous tips. This skill had earned her the best section in the restaurant, the corner tables near the windows, where high-profile guests usually preferred to sit. "Sarah, honey, can you cover section 4 tonight?" asked Margaret, the senior server who had called in with a migraine. "I know it's not your usual area, but you're the only one who can handle it properly." "Of course," Sarah replied, pleased at the compliment. She had been hoping to pick up extra tables anyway. Friday nights meant better tips, and she was saving up for a new car. The old Honda she drove wasn't exactly impressive in the restaurant's parking lot, which was usually filled with luxury vehicles. As she familiarized herself with their expanded section, Sarah noticed her regular customers starting to arrive. There was Mr. Davidson, the real estate mogul who always ordered the aged ribeye, and Mrs. Peterson, the gallery owner who loved to talk about her latest art acquisitions. Sarah knew exactly how to serve them, which wines to recommend, when to check on them, and when to give them space. The kitchen was buzzing with activity, and the aroma of Chef Marcus's famous sauce filled the air. Sarah grabbed a fresh batch of warm bread for her tables, arranging it perfectly in the baskets. She had learned early on that presentation was everything at the Golden Fork. "2 new reservations just came in," announced Jessica, the hostess, her tablet in hand. "And we got several walk-ins waiting." The restaurant's popularity meant they were often fully booked, especially on Friday nights. Sarah glanced at the growing crowd in the waiting area. Most were dressed in expensive suits or designer dresses, exactly the kind of customers she preferred to serve. She had learned that appearance usually indicated how well a table would tip, and she wasn't ashamed to admit she gave better service to those she thought would be more generous. As she delivered a bottle of premium champagne to a celebrating couple, Sarah noticed a man walking in alone. He was black, probably in his 50s, wearing clothes that, while clean and neat, weren't the designer brands she usually saw at the Golden Fork. He carried himself with quiet dignity, but Sarah's prejudices immediately kicked in. "Great," she muttered under her breath, watching Jessica lead him to table 12, right in the middle of her section. In her experience, tables like this meant more work for less reward. She had already decided what kind of customer he would be before he even sat down. The man took his seat, carefully unfolding his napkin and placing it in his lap with practiced movements. There was something measured and precise about his actions that Sarah failed to notice, too busy making assumptions based on his appearance. "Welcome to the Golden Fork," she said, approaching the table with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her tone was polite but noticeably cooler than the warm welcome she had given to other guests. "Can I start you with something to drink?" Little did Sarah know that this ordinary Friday night was about to become anything but regular. The man sitting at table 12 would change not only her perspective, but the entire culture of the Golden Fork. But for now, she was just a waitress starting her shift, unaware that her actions in the next few hours would have consequences that would ripple far beyond the restaurant's elegant walls. Sarah stood at the service station, pretending to organize menus while watching the man at table 12 study his menu with careful attention. She had given him the bare minimum of service, a glass of water, and a quick recitation of the specials, before hurrying off to attend to her other tables. "Look at him," she whispered to Mike, another server who was sorting silverware beside her. "He's probably going to ask about the cheapest items on the menu." She rolled her eyes as the man pulled out reading glasses to examine the wine list. Mike glanced over at the table. "Maybe he's just careful with his choices," he suggested, but Sarah wasn't interested in giving the benefit of the doubt. The man raised his hand politely to signal for service. Sarah took her time walking over, stopping to chat with other customers along the way. When she finally reached table 12, the man looked up with a gentle smile. "I have a few questions about your wine selection," he said, his voice carrying a hint of sophistication that Sarah chose to ignore. "Could you tell me more about the French Bordeaux you have listed?" Sarah's lips curled into a slight smirk. "It's quite expensive," she said pointedly, tapping the price on the menu. "Perhaps you prefer something more modest?" Her tone was dripping with condescension. To her surprise, the man seemed unruffled. "I'm actually quite familiar with Bordeaux wines," he replied calmly. "I'm particularly interested in the 2015 Chateau Margaux. Would you recommend that vintage?" Sarah felt a flicker of irritation. She knew nothing about the wine he mentioned, but rather than admit it, she gave a vague response. "All our wines are good," she said dismissively. "Should I give you more time to decide?" Without waiting for his answer, she walked back to the service station where Jessica was inputting orders into the computer. "Can you believe this guy?" Sarah complained. "Acting like he knows about fancy wines. He's probably never even been to France." Jessica looked uncomfortable. "Maybe we shouldn't jump to conclusions," she said softly, but Sarah was already launching into another commentary about the customer's appearance and behavior. As the evening progressed, Sarah's treatment of table 12 became increasingly obvious. She was quick to serve her other customers, refreshing their drinks and checking on their meals promptly. But for the man at 12, she remained scarce, letting his water glass sit empty and taking ages to process his order. When he ordered the restaurant's most expensive steak and the Chateau Margaux he had inquired about, Sarah's eyebrows shot up. She shared knowing looks with her colleagues, implying that he might not be able to pay for such an expensive meal. "I bet his card gets declined," she whispered to the bartender while waiting for the wine. "Watch, this is going to be a whole scene later." The bartender carefully pulled out the bottle of Chateau Margaux, worth several $100s. "Sarah," he said quietly, "maybe you should ease up a bit. He seems like a decent customer." But Sarah wasn't listening. She returned to table 12 and placed the wine bottle down without the usual presentation she gave to other customers ordering expensive wines. She didn't offer to let him taste it first, didn't describe its characteristics, and didn't show the label, all standard practices at the Golden Fork. Throughout his meal, she made a show of providing elaborate, attentive service to the tables around him while giving him only cursory attention. She didn't notice how some of her other customers were beginning to observe this disparity in treatment, their expressions growing increasingly concerned. The man ate his meal with dignity, cutting his perfectly cooked steak with precise movements. He didn't complain about the service, didn't make a fuss about the empty water glass, and maintained his composure even when Sarah took 20 minutes to bring him the dessert menu. What Sarah also failed to notice was how he quietly documented each interaction on his phone between bites. She didn't see how he noted the time of each of her visits to his table compared to others, or how he observed her animated conversations with other customers while she could barely muster a word for him. Several times during the evening, other diners tried to catch Sarah's attention, seemingly wanting to tell her something about her customer at table 12. But she was too busy sharing her running commentary with her colleagues to notice these attempts at intervention. As the evening wore on, Sarah's behavior became a source of quiet discussion among the other servers. Even those who usually laughed at her jokes were beginning to feel uneasy about her obvious discrimination. But Sarah remained oblivious to the shifting atmosphere, convinced in her prejudiced assumptions about the man at table 12. At a corner table near the window, David Chen, a regular customer at the Golden Fork, was celebrating his wife's promotion with what was supposed to be a quiet dinner. However, his attention kept drifting to the disturbing scene unfolding at table 12. As a prominent business owner himself, he had dined with Judge Robert Thompson several times during charity events and legal functions. "Honey, isn't that Judge Thompson?" his wife Linda whispered, her forehead creased with concern as they watched Sarah's dismissive behavior toward the distinguished judge. David nodded slowly, his appetite diminishing as he observed the blatant discrimination playing out before them. Judge Thompson's reputation in Atlanta was legendary. He had risen from humble beginnings to become one of the most respected federal judges in the state. His recent ruling on a major discrimination case had made national headlines, yet here he sat, being treated like an unwelcome guest by a prejudiced waitress who had no idea who he was. At another table, Maria Rodriguez, a local news reporter, was having dinner with her cameraman. She had interviewed Judge Thompson just last week about his landmark decision in the Carter versus Montgomery case, where he had ruled against a company for racial discrimination in their hiring practices. She grabbed her phone under the table, quietly documenting Sarah's behavior. "This is unbelievable," Maria murmured to her colleague. "The man who just made history fighting workplace discrimination is experiencing it firsthand." She watched as Sarah once again bypassed Judge Thompson's table, ignoring his empty water glass while attentively serving others. The restaurant's regular customers, many of whom were influential members of Atlanta's business and legal community, exchanged knowing glances. They recognized the quiet, dignified man who had presided over numerous high-profile cases in their city. Some had appeared in his courtroom, others had seen him speak at community events, and a few had worked with him on various civic projects. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, a retired civil rights attorney who had mentored under Judge Thompson 20 years ago, sat at her usual table, her hands trembling with anger as she watched the scene unfold. She had half a mind to walk over and educate the young waitress about the accomplished man she was so callously disrespecting. "Should we say something?" Linda asked her husband, but David shook his head. "Look at his face," David replied quietly. "He's handling this his own way." Indeed, Judge Thompson maintained his composed demeanor, methodically documenting each interaction on his phone. Those who knew him recognized this as his approach to building a case, thorough, systematic, and irrefutable. The other servers had begun to notice the growing discomfort among their regular customers. Mike, who had initially listened to Sarah's comments, now tried to distance himself from her behavior. He had caught glimpses of recognition on several customers' faces when they looked at table 12, and a sense of dread was building in his stomach. Jessica, the hostess, was frantically trying to remember if she had seen Judge Thompson's name on any recent reservations. The man had walked in without one, but something about him seemed familiar. She had seen his photo somewhere recently, perhaps in the local newspaper or on the news. As the evening progressed, the tension in the restaurant became palpable. Regular customers who normally enjoyed casual conversations with neighboring tables were unusually quiet, their attention focused on the drama unfolding before them. Some typed quietly on their phones, presumably documenting what they were witnessing. Judge Thompson, meanwhile, continued his meal with the same dignity and grace he showed in his courtroom. He seemed to be observing not just Sarah's behavior, but the reactions of those around him. His eyes occasionally met those of other diners, acknowledging their concerned glances with subtle nods. The other staff members had picked up on the shifting atmosphere. The bartender, who had served Judge Thompson at various legal community events, was trying to catch Sarah's attention, wanting to warn her. But she remained oblivious, continuing her poor service and snide comments, unaware that she was digging herself deeper into a situation that would soon change her life forever. What made the scene particularly powerful was the stark contrast between Judge Thompson's composed dignity and Sarah's obvious prejudice. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to fighting discrimination, quietly experiencing it firsthand, while dozens of people who knew his true identity watched in silence, waiting to see how this would unfold. Judge Robert Thompson dabbed his mouth with his napkin, maintaining the same calm demeanor he was known for in his courtroom. Despite Sarah's continued poor service, he remained a picture of composure. Each time she rushed past his table or ignored his requests, he simply made another note on his phone, his fingers moving with quiet purpose. The restaurant's famous chocolate souffle sat half-eaten before him. Sarah had practically thrown it on the table, not bothering with the usual elegant presentation the Golden Fork was known for. She hadn't even mentioned that it needed to be ordered 30 minutes in advance, a courtesy she had enthusiastically explained to the table of executives next to him. "Is everything all right with your dessert, sir?" Sarah asked, her tone making it clear she didn't actually care about the answer. It was the first time she had checked on his meal without being signaled. "Yes, thank you," Judge Thompson replied politely. "Though I would appreciate some coffee if possible." His voice carried the same measured tone he used when addressing lawyers in his courtroom. "We're a bit busy right now," Sarah replied, gesturing vaguely at other tables. "I'll try to get to it when I can." She turned away quickly, hurrying to serve fresh coffee to her other customers. Judge Thompson watched as she spent the next 15 minutes chatting with a group of young professionals, laughing at their jokes and providing attentive service. His coffee request remained unfulfilled, but he didn't raise his hand to remind her. Instead, he documented the time and added it to his growing list of observations. At a nearby table, David Chen couldn't contain himself any longer. He started to stand up, intending to intervene, but his wife Linda gently touched his arm. "Look," she whispered, nodding toward Judge Thompson. The judge had just finished typing something on his phone. His face showed no anger, no frustration, only the patient, observant expression of someone gathering evidence. It was the same look he wore during complex trials, when he allowed events to unfold naturally before making his ruling. "He's teaching without saying a word," Linda realized aloud, though quietly enough that only her husband could hear. "This is going to be a lesson she'll never forget." Throughout the evening, Judge Thompson had maintained perfect manners. He had said please and thank you for every interaction, no matter how dismissive Sarah's service had been. When she had mockingly explained the menu items as if he couldn't read them himself, he had listened patiently. When she had questioned whether he could afford the wine he ordered, he had responded with calm assurance rather than offense. Sarah, meanwhile, continued her performance of poor service, unaware that she was creating a perfect case study in discrimination. She had no idea that every snide comment, every ignored request, every instance of differential treatment was being meticulously documented not just by Judge Thompson, but by several other diners as well. Maria Rodriguez, the news reporter, had quietly filmed several instances of Sarah's behavior, capturing the stark contrast between her treatment of Judge Thompson and other customers. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman had written detailed notes on her napkin, her years of civil rights legal work making her especially attuned to the patterns of discrimination playing out before her. As the evening wore on, Judge Thompson's dignified response to the discrimination became a powerful testimony in itself. He didn't raise his voice, didn't demand to speak to a manager, and didn't try to reveal his identity to force better treatment. Instead, he chose to experience the full extent of Sarah's prejudice, knowing that this documentation would serve a greater purpose. The coffee never came, but Judge Thompson didn't mention it again. When Sarah finally brought his bill, she dropped it on the table without a word, having already told her colleagues she expected either a complaint about the price or a minimal tip. Opening the leather folder, Judge Thompson removed his credit card, a black American Express card that Sarah had failed to notice. He placed it in the folder along with a generous tip, demonstrating that her assumptions about his financial status were just another of her misguided prejudices. "Thank you for the interesting evening," he said quietly as he handed her back the folder, his words carrying a weight she didn't yet understand. Sarah barely nodded in response, already turning away to serve her preferred customers. Little did she know that her actions that evening would soon become a powerful teaching moment, not just for her, but for the entire restaurant industry in Atlanta. Judge Thompson's quiet dignity in the face of discrimination would prove far more effective than any immediate confrontation could have been. As Judge Thompson prepared to leave the Golden Fork, the evening took an unexpected turn. Marcus Reynolds, the restaurant's owner, burst through the kitchen doors with an energy that turned heads throughout the dining room. His face lit up with recognition as he spotted Judge Thompson rising from his table. "Judge Thompson," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the restaurant. "I had no idea you were dining with us tonight." He hurried toward table 12, his hand extended in greeting. Sarah, who was clearing a nearby table, froze mid-motion, a half-empty wine glass suspended in her trembling hand. The name struck her like a physical blow. Judge Thompson, the same Judge Thompson she had read about in last week's newspaper, the federal judge who had just won the biggest discrimination case in Atlanta's history. "Marcus," Judge Thompson replied warmly, shaking the owner's hand. "It's good to see you. Your restaurant came highly recommended by several colleagues from the courthouse." Sarah's face drained of color as she watched the interaction. The wine glass in her hand began to shake more noticeably, and she quickly set it down before she could drop it. "I hope everything was to your satisfaction," Marcus said, gesturing at the table. "Had I known you were here, I would have ensured you received our very best service." He shot a questioning look at Sarah, who was now trying to make herself invisible behind a decorative plant. "The food was excellent," Judge Thompson replied diplomatically. "And the evening was educational." His slight pause spoke volumes to those who had witnessed Sarah's behavior throughout the night. Around the restaurant, other diners who had watched the evening unfold were now openly staring at the scene. Some had their phones out, Recording the moment, Sarah would realize exactly who she had been discriminating against. Judge Thompson just finished presiding over the Williams discrimination case. Marcus continued proudly, unaware of the situation. It was a landmark victory for workplace equality in our state. We're honored to have you here, Your Honor. Sarah's legs felt weak as the full impact of her actions began to sink in. She had spent the entire evening mocking and providing discriminatory service to one of the most respected federal judges in Atlanta, a man known specifically for his work against discrimination. Sarah, Marcus called out, waving her over. Come meet Judge Thompson. He's one of the most influential civil rights figures in our city. With legs that felt like lead, Sarah forced herself to walk toward them. Each step seemed to take an eternity as she remembered every snide comment, every ignored request, every moment of poor service she had provided throughout the evening. Why, Your Honor, she managed to stammer, her voice barely above a whisper. The judge's calm gaze met hers, and she saw no anger there, only a penetrating wisdom that made her feel even smaller. Sarah has been with us for 3 years, Marcus was saying, still unaware of the evening's events. I trust she took excellent care of you? Before Judge Thompson could respond, Mrs. Eleanor Waitman stood up from her table. Marcus, she said firmly, I believe you should know what happened here tonight. As a respected regular customer and former civil rights attorney, her words carried weight. Other diners began to speak up as well. David Chen mentioned the ignored requests and poor service. Maria Rodriguez, the news reporter, referred to the video evidence she had gathered. One by one, witnesses to Sarah's discrimination came forward. Marcus's face darkened as he listened to the accounts. The proud smile he had worn moments ago transformed into an expression of horror and embarrassment. Judge Thompson, he began, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am. But Judge Thompson raised his hand gently, silencing the apologies. Perhaps, he said, his voice carrying the same measured tone he used in his courtroom, this can be an opportunity for growth rather than just punishment. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, tears welling in her eyes as the magnitude of her actions became clear. Her prejudices and assumptions had led her to discriminate against not just any customer, but against someone who had dedicated his life to fighting such discrimination. The other servers, who had listened to Sarah's commentary throughout the evening, now stood in shocked silence. The revelation of Judge Thompson's identity had transformed their ordinary Friday night into a moment that would change their perspectives forever. The next morning, Marcus Reynolds sat in his office at the Golden Fork, staring at his computer screen in disbelief. His email inbox was flooded with messages about the previous night's events. Several regular customers had sent detailed accounts of Sarah's discriminatory behavior toward Judge Thompson, including video clips and written testimonies. At precisely 9:00 a.m., his phone rang. The caller ID displayed Thompson and Associates Legal Office. Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he answered the call. Mr. Reynolds, a professional voice began, I'm calling on behalf of Judge Robert Thompson regarding an incident at your restaurant last evening. The judge would like to schedule a meeting with you and your staff for Monday morning. Marcus quickly agreed, relief washing over him that the judge wanted to talk rather than immediately filing a lawsuit. He knew the restaurant's reputation, and possibly its future, hung in the balance. Sarah sat in her small apartment, surrounded by crumpled tissues. She hadn't slept all night, replaying every moment of her interaction with Judge Thompson. Her phone was filled with missed calls from coworkers and angry messages on social media. The story had already begun spreading through Atlanta's restaurant community. I can't believe I did that, she whispered to herself for the 100th time. Her prejudices and assumptions had been exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible. The judge's calm dignity throughout the evening only made her behavior seem even more shameful. Around noon, Sarah received a text from Marcus. Staff meeting Monday at 9 a.m. Judge Thompson will be present. Attendance mandatory. Her stomach churned as she read the message. Part of her wanted to quit immediately, but she knew running away wouldn't solve anything. Meanwhile, at the federal courthouse, Judge Thompson sat in his chambers, reviewing the notes he had taken the previous evening. His law clerk, James Wilson, listened intently as the judge described his experience. Your Honor, James said carefully, with all due respect, you could file a major discrimination lawsuit. The evidence is overwhelming. He gestured at the video clips that Maria Rodriguez, the news reporter, had already forwarded to their office. Judge Thompson smiled slightly. Sometimes, James, the law is a tool for punishment. Other times, it can be a catalyst for education and change. He turned his computer screen to show James what he had been working on, not a lawsuit, but a comprehensive anti-discrimination training program. Throughout the weekend, the incident became a hot topic in Atlanta's social circles. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman had shared the story with her colleagues at the Civil Rights Attorneys Association. David Chen had mentioned it during a business meeting, and Maria Rodriguez was preparing a feature story about discrimination in the service industry. The Golden Fork's regular customers were divided in their reactions. Some demanded Sarah's immediate termination, while others, following Judge Thompson's example, suggested this could be a teaching moment for the entire restaurant industry. Marcus spent the weekend revising the restaurant's training policies and employee handbook. He realized that Sarah's behavior, while extreme, might reflect deeper biases that needed to be addressed throughout his organization. On Sunday evening, Sarah received another message, this time from an unexpected source. It was from Judge Thompson's office. The judge requests that you prepare a written account of your thoughts and actions from Friday night, to be discussed during tomorrow's meeting. He believes your honest reflection will be valuable for the discussion. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, staring at a blank piece of paper. How could she explain actions that now seemed so obviously wrong? How had she let her prejudices control her behavior so completely? With trembling hands, she began to write. Across town, Judge Thompson finished preparing his presentation for the Monday meeting. His approach wasn't aimed at punishment but at transformation. He had seen too many discrimination cases end in bitter settlements that changed nothing. This time, he saw an opportunity to address the root causes of prejudice. The local news had picked up the story, though they withheld names at Judge Thompson's request. The headline read, "Federal Judge Turns Restaurant Discrimination into Teaching Moment." The article praised his measured response and highlighted how a negative experience could be transformed into positive change. As Sunday drew to a close, everyone involved prepared for the Monday meeting in their own way. Sarah rehearsed her apology, Marcus reviewed his new policies, and Judge Thompson finalized his presentation. What had started as a simple dinner reservation was about to become a pivotal moment in Atlanta's ongoing conversation about discrimination and dignity. Monday morning arrived with a sense of nervous anticipation at the Golden Fork. The restaurant's main dining room, usually filled with elegant table settings and the smell of breakfast preparations, had been transformed into a makeshift conference room. The staff arrived early, speaking in hushed tones as they took their seats. Sarah sat in the front row, clutching her written reflection like a lifeline. She had barely slept, spending most of the night rewriting her thoughts until they truly reflected the depth of her regret and understanding. Dark circles under her eyes testified to her sleepless nights since Friday's incident. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Judge Thompson walked in, accompanied by two other people, Dr. Lisa Martinez, a respected diversity trainer, and James Wilson, his law clerk. The judge carried himself with the same quiet dignity he had shown during his dinner, wearing a well-tailored suit that Sarah now noticed was clearly expensive. "Good morning," Judge Thompson began, his voice warm but authoritative. "I'm here today not as a judge, but as someone who believes in the power of education and growth." He paused, looking around the room. "What happened on Friday night was unfortunate, but it presents us with an opportunity." Marcus Reynolds sat near Sarah, his usual confident demeanor subdued. The restaurant owner had spent the weekend worried about lawsuits and bad publicity, but Judge Thompson's opening words suggested a different approach. "Ms. Miller," Judge Thompson said, addressing Sarah directly, "would you please share your reflection with us?" Sarah stood on shaky legs, unfolding her paper. Her voice trembled as she began reading. "I spent every minute since Friday night thinking about my actions. I didn't just fail at my job. I failed as a human being. I let prejudices I didn't even realize I had control my behavior." As Sarah read her honest, emotional reflection, several of her colleagues wiped away tears. Even those who had laughed at her comments on Friday night were now confronting their own biases and complicity. Judge Thompson listened intently, nodding occasionally. When Sarah finished, he said, "Thank you for your honesty. Recognition of our biases is the first step toward change." He then turned to address the entire staff. Now, I'd like to share something with you. He played a compilation of video clips from Friday night, showing not just Sarah's actions, but the reactions of other staff members who had witnessed the discrimination without speaking up. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as they watched. This isn't about shame, Judge Thompson explained. It's about awareness. Dr. Martinez will help us understand how unconscious biases affect our behavior and, more importantly, how to recognize and overcome them. Dr. Martinez stepped forward, beginning an interactive session that would last several hours. She had the staff participate in exercises that revealed their own hidden biases, leading to uncomfortable but necessary conversations about prejudice in the service industry. During one particularly powerful moment, Judge Thompson shared stories from his own life, times when he had faced discrimination and how he had chosen to respond with dignity rather than anger. Every instance of discrimination, he said, is an opportunity to either perpetuate hatred or promote understanding. Sarah, who had expected to be fired or publicly humiliated, found herself instead being included in discussions about solutions. Her perspective as someone who had confronted her own biases became valuable to the conversation. By early afternoon, the Golden Fork staff had not only received anti-bias training, but had also helped develop new service protocols designed to ensure equal treatment for all customers. Marcus announced that similar training would become a regular part of staff development. This isn't the end, Judge Thompson concluded. It's a beginning. True change requires ongoing commitment and conscious effort. He turned to Sarah. Are you willing to be part of that change? Sarah stood again, more steadily this time. Yes, Your Honor. I want to help make sure no one else experiences what you did on Friday night. As the meeting concluded, Judge Thompson shook hands with each staff member, including Sarah. When he reached her, he said quietly, "Remember, the measure of a person isn't in never making mistakes, but in how they learn from them." The staff left the meeting changed, not just in their awareness of discrimination, but in their understanding of how to address it. What could have been a story of punishment and shame had become one of education and growth, thanks to the wisdom of a judge who saw beyond revenge to the possibility of real change. 6 months after the incident at the Golden Fork, the restaurant had transformed into a model of inclusive service in Atlanta's dining scene. The story of Judge Thompson's dinner and its aftermath had spread throughout the city's restaurant community, inspiring changes that reached far beyond one establishment. Sarah Miller, once known for her discriminatory behavior, had become an unexpected advocate for change. She now led monthly training sessions for new staff members. One warm evening, Judge Thompson returned to the Golden Fork for dinner. This time he had a reservation, and the staff knew exactly who he was. But the respectful service he received wasn't because of his position. It was the same treatment every customer now experienced. Sarah, who had requested to be his server again, approached his table with a confidence born of genuine growth. "Good evening, Judge Thompson," she said, her voice steady and professional. "Welcome back to the Golden Fork." The judge smiled warmly. "Good evening, Sarah. I hear you've been doing remarkable work these past months." Indeed, she had. Sarah had not only changed her own behavior, but had become passionate about helping others recognize and overcome their biases. She had spoken at several restaurant industry events, sharing her experience and the lessons she had learned. "Your experience here changed more than just me," Sarah told him as she served his appetizer. "It changed our entire industry in Atlanta." She gestured around the dining room, where a diverse mix of customers enjoyed their meals, all receiving the same high level of service. The restaurant's success had actually increased since implementing the new training program. Word had spread about their commitment to equal treatment, and the Golden Fork had become known not just for its excellent food, but for its inclusive atmosphere. Maria Rodriguez, the news reporter who had witnessed the original incident, had written a follow-up story about the restaurant's transformation. The article had gone viral, leading to restaurants in other cities reaching out to learn about their anti-bias training program. During his meal, Judge Thompson observed the visible changes in the restaurant's operation. The staff worked together seamlessly, treating every customer with the same level of respect and attention he had been denied 6 months ago. Even more impressive was the way they helped each other recognize and correct unconscious biases before they could affect their service. As Sarah brought his dessert, the same chocolate souffle he had ordered on that fateful night, she shared some news. We're starting a mentorship program for other restaurants, she explained, helping them implement the changes we've made here. Would you consider being our advisory board chairman? Judge Thompson considered the request. Throughout his career, he had issued many rulings against discrimination, but few had led to such positive, lasting change as his dinner 6 months ago. I would be honored, he replied. The story of the Golden Fork had become a case study in how to turn a negative incident into positive change. Business schools now used it as an example of effective crisis management and cultural transformation. Civil rights organizations pointed to it as proof that education could be more powerful than punishment. Before leaving that evening, Judge Thompson looked around the transformed restaurant. The same chandelier sparkled above, the same jazz music played softly in the background, but everything else had changed. He saw Sarah confidently training a new server, explaining not just the menu items but the importance of treating every customer with equal respect. Sometimes, he remarked to Marcus as he prepared to leave, the most powerful changes come not from court orders or legal decisions, but from people willing to learn from their mistakes. The incident that could have ended in lawsuits and ruined reputations had instead sparked a movement of positive change throughout Atlanta's restaurant industry. It proved that one evening of discrimination, handled with wisdom and grace, could lead to lasting transformation. As Judge Thompson left the Golden Fork that night, he knew that his decision to turn a hurtful incident into a teaching moment had created ripples of change that would continue to spread. The restaurant had become more than just a place to eat. It was now a symbol of how confronting bias with dignity and wisdom could transform not just individuals, but entire communities.